Welcome to the Windward Institute's Fall Community Lecture, Transforming Literacy Education, Early Identification, Intervention, and Teacher Training with Dr. Katharine Pace Miles. The WI is a division of the Windward School committed to increasing childhood literacy rates. The WI hosts courses, workshops, and school-based professional development, and a number of outreach initiatives, including free reading screenings made possible by the Early Literacy Endowment. Free resources for educators and literacy enthusiasts can be found on the Windward Institute website. The Windward Institute is made possible by the Windward School and the generous philanthropic support from individual, corporate, and foundation funders. Please consider supporting the WI by scanning the QR code to donate.
Thank you for those who are joining us in person and virtually for your continued support of this work. Windward is dedicated to advancing understanding and advocacy around language-based learning disabilities. Our free community lectures play a critical role in sharing that expertise, as Alexis mentioned. But tonight, we are so thrilled to have Dr. Katharine Pace Miles with us to present our fall community lecture. Dr. Miles is an associate professor and the director of advanced certificates in reading science at the Brooklyn College City University of New York. She completed her doctoral degree in educational psychology with a subspecialty in research on the acquisition of literacy. At Brooklyn College, she teaches and oversees graduate and undergraduate courses in the development and teaching of literacy and reading interventions. Dr. Miles brings a powerful personal perspective to her work. As a former early childhood teacher and learning specialist, she conducted reading and writing assessments, interventions for students with learning delays and disabilities. She worked closely with teachers and families and school psychologists to support student progress. During the pandemic, Dr. Miles saw a need for dedicated intervention support for struggling readers in the underserved communities in New York City. She answered that need by training her graduate and undergraduate students in an evidence-based program called Reading Go. And then she worked closely with the DOE to pair these pre-service teachers with struggling first and second grade readers at a high-needs school in New York City. Students received tutoring 3 to 5 times per week, which had a dual benefit. These undergraduate students gained valuable experience in implementing research-based interventions, and families received supports they needed in a critical time during their child's development. This initiative proved so effective that it was expanded rapidly and was scaled university-wide. The CUNY Reading Corps, which Dr. Miles co-founded, improves pre-service teachers training and now provides high-dosage tutoring to over 2,300 historically underserved New York City students per year. That is an outstanding feat, and I'm just so impressed by the work that you do. She's the author of the Reading Ready and Reading Ready for the Whole Phonics, and the academic advisor for Reading Go. Both Reading Ready and Reading Go are used by CUNY Reading Corps as an evidence-based interventions. She is the founder and president of the Reading Institute, which partners with universities, schools, districts, and community-based organizations to provide free intervention for grounded in the science of reading as well as professional learning. Dr. Miles was the guest at our most popular podcast episode on the topic of orthographic mapping and word reading interventions. And she was also our first in-person guest for the Lead on Read, which focuses on leadership in the reading space. So we had her twice on the podcast, which was so wonderful to see. Dr. Miles is a literacy expert who is truly walking the walk, and we are so fortunate to have an opportunity to learn from her this evening. Her lecture tonight will focus on comprehensive framework for advancing literacy education, and 3 critical areas that she will highlight will include early intervention of learning difficulties, effective intervention, and teacher training. Dr. Miles will underscore the importance of early detection and the use of evidence-based interventions. She'll also address inequities and the complex nature of providing timely intervention with a special focus on stigma and access barriers. She will discuss challenges faced by in-service and pre-service teachers, including the need for an efficient and practical training amidst the realities of post-pandemic education. The presentation tonight will showcase national and local initiatives such as NYC Reads, CUNY Reading Corps, and Path Forward, and the ways in which these models are scalable solutions with much broader implications and applications. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Katharine Pace Miles for tonight's presentation, Transforming Literacy Education, Early Identification, Interventions, and Teacher Training. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Windward. It's been an exceptional day. I've been here since 9 a.m., seeing all of the incredible instruction that goes on in the classrooms here, and it's the type of instruction that I want for all students. And so really, you've inspired me to really keep going and keep the energy up. So I'm honored to be here to discuss transforming literacy education with a focus, as you heard, on 3 things: early identification, intervention, and teacher training. For those of you watching remotely, I just want to let you know there was a wonderful reception that happened before. Everyone ate and drank, and so I'm going to try and keep this as lively as possible. Hence our motivating slides here. I think the transformer wants to hang out just a little bit longer. Let's see if I'll do it this way. Okay, so some of you may be well versed in why we need a transformation, and others may be new to this information, so I want to take a second. Since 1992, so focus at the bottom of this bar chart, that was 32 years ago, we have made little progress, going from the 29th% of 4th graders reading at a proficient level to only the 33rd% in the most recent report from the National Association of Education Progress. That's quite disturbing. With almost 50 million students in the US public schools and 67% of them, reading at below a proficient level, this means that 33.2 million students are left behind. Usually we only talk about the percentages, the 33%, right? But when you think about it in raw numbers, it should really drive the point home even more. 33 million students. Based on those stats, you shouldn't be surprised that 54% of adults in the US read below the equivalent of a 6th grade level. Many adults are parents, and it is deeply concerning that children of parents with low literacy levels have a 72% chance of being at the lowest level of literacy when they become adults. This traps children in a cycle of illiteracy. Based on the low 4th grade proficiency rates, low adult literacy rates, and the cycles of illiteracy in our society, it may not be surprising that only 38% of adults in the US have a bachelor's degree or higher. That finding on college degrees helps us better understand our society when you consider Chaw's stages of reading development, in which you learn to read up to 2nd or 3rd grade, and then you shift to reading to learn. But importantly, when you are able to get above a 6th grade level, as this diagram shows, you become more proficient in critically examining information to hold multiple viewpoints at once. You also become more proficient at synthesizing information to construct and reconstruct knowledge of the world. Half of adults in the US don't get there. All of this illiteracy from childhood through adulthood results in our government spending $2.2 trillion annually to combat it and its repercussions. So if you're not motivated emotionally, maybe financially will be your motivation. Furthermore, our society not only loses out financially, but we miss out on the non-economic benefits of literacy, which the OECD found to be increased trust in others, political efficacy, which means that you believe that you understand and can influence our government, increased volunteerism, and self-reported health. These are major things that we're missing out on. Earlier, I showed that since 1992, there has been little change in literacy outcomes, but there have been major federal initiatives that have attempted to combat the issue. Here I'm just calling out the major policies just since the start of my career in education roughly 20 years ago. Some of you recognize these. Now, it actually makes sense that not much difference has been made with these federal policies because so much power, which often is money and funding, lies at the state and local level. Given the long history of federal failures, it's time to beef up our state and local initiatives. In fact, locally in New York City and New York State, we have 4 major initiatives focused on the science of reading. It's critical that we get these variables that impact the implementation of these initiatives right, or else the science of reading policies will also be left in the political graveyard. To get this right, we first need to recognize the extent of our local problem. This triangle represents the RTI-MTSS model, which has strong research support and shows that when Tier 1 is implemented well, only 15% of students need targeted interventions and 5% need intensive interventions. But my colleague, Shireen Hashim, and I used publicly available English language arts scores and found that only 3% of New York City schools fit this model. And only 38% of New York City public schools look like any sort of triangle. Instead, we saw a variety of shapes in the data set. Here are the recent NAEP scores from around the country, New York State, and New York City. The scores are represented on the NAEP as the percent of students who are well served by Tier 1, meaning those students who are reading proficiently or above, versus those students who need interventions. They're reading at a basic or below basic level. That's the yellow and the red. There is obviously a lot of need for targeted and intensive interventions. And I hate to tell you that this only becomes more grim when you look at the publicly available ELA state test scores across New York State. As you can see, there is a bit of an upstate versus downstate divide here. You can see my little map of New York over in the corner, with my hometown of Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse having shocking amounts of students in need of intensive interventions. Let's zoom back to New York City. This is a stark example of the variability that exists really in all systems. Here on the left, you see a small selective school, it's a charter school, with 100% of students scoring well or proficiently on the state ELA test. And then a school with 94% of students scoring low and needing support, or they're in the yellow and the red. Okay, these are schools in the same system. In schools like I just showed, which I'm very familiar with, there are heart-wrenching questions that leadership winds up grappling with when so many students are in need of support. Who's going to receive the evaluation? Who's going to get the high-dosage intervention? And then who will provide that intervention? Do you have enough people in the building? So let's start our journey of transforming into a vehicle to symbolize progressing forward quickly because we have languished too long. As we talk about variables to transform literacy, these critical foundational variables are not to be underestimated. There's a lot of government and community-based organizations that are tackling these challenges related to literacy, and even our own DOE system deals with feeding our children and making sure they have what they need to be successful during the school day. I want to acknowledge that these are vital to children's ability to learn. They come first before we start talking about literacy. While there are many in-school variables to consider, as I'm showing here, I'm just going to focus on 3 of these tonight, okay? That is because New York City, where I am, has already decided on its Tier 1 or whole class instructional approach. For anyone not in New York, they have picked 3 programs. So you'll see the 3 with the icons that we'll focus on. Okay, we will start with identification. I'm talking here about identification of students who need support. These could be individuals with dyslexia, reading disabilities, language-based reading disabilities, or in my world, it's really just simply striving readers, because so many of the kids I work with never wind up with a diagnosis. A colleague of mine who also teaches at a CUNY campus asked her undergraduate student if I could share this writing sample with you all. The student wrote it in response to an in-class prompt that was, "What was school like for you?" The college student wrote, "I believe that I was a product of New York school system failing me. When I was in elementary school, dyslexia wasn't recognized as a mental educational disability. I couldn't read at all." I'm gonna jump down a little bit. "I vividly remember my teacher telling me, just take a picture walk. I didn't realize at the time, but she had given up on me." And the passage is really, it is heart-wrenching when you get to the end of this passage. This student needed these assessments in place, which allow us to identify students early in their educational journey as a child who needs support. And for any of you coming to this not knowing, this is in a progression of what needs to happen first, and this needs to be in every school in our system. The first line of defense for identification is that screener that you saw up top. It is a screener that all students need to take. It needs to be a few things: quick to administer, because every student in the class needs to take it. It needs to accurately sort students into 2 categories first, and then we'll go from there. But it's students at risk who need interventions versus students not at risk. Later on, you go deeper. And importantly, these screeners need to be in place in kindergarten, and they need to be taken seriously in kindergarten. We still seem to have this, it's okay, we'll keep waiting approach. 39 states have screening requirements. New York is not one of them. While this is depressing, it also gives us a golden opportunity to learn from the mistakes of other states. And of course, to learn what has worked well in other states. There's a lot of learning that we can do. While there isn't a state policy, New York City recently required that all kindergarten to 2nd grade students are screened using the Acadience assessment. And some of my colleagues that are a big part of this initiative are in the room. And there are multiple options to screen students in 3rd through 10th grade. Okay, and I do, before I go to the next slide, I want to thank them for all of their hard work. While this is a requirement in New York City, and I understand that every school is sharing data differently, okay, I understand that. I have a 3rd grader and a kindergartner in the New York City public school system. I have done 10 parent-teacher conferences, and so far, not one teacher has brought up the Acadience scores to me. Imagine you're a parent who has attended several parent-teacher conferences, who then receives an email from administration out of nowhere that your child is at risk for being retained based on 2nd grade reading scores. This is what happened to my friend Michelle, who is not posted, but this might as well be a picture of her, because I received the call right after she read the email, okay? Now let's assume we tackle this, what I think is low-hanging fruit, which is parent transparency with data, okay? When I taught 20 years ago, I was required to slide a piece of paper across the parent-teacher conference table and share reading screening data with all of the parents that I taught, and then I became a reading specialist. I never conducted a meeting without that data readily available and shared. That was 20 years ago. Okay. There are other major identification issues that we need to contend with, okay? And I'm gonna get a little technical here, but hang with me, okay? One of the most obvious testing issues in New York City is that the test sample upon which the assessment was normed needs to be representative of the sample of students it is used with. Please note that 73% of students in New York City, in the New York City public schools system, are economically disadvantaged, and 83% are students of color based on last year's school data. There may not be a test out there that matches our population. We've got to contend with this. Here is the table of national norms of Acadience data, that's the one that's required K2, broken down by race ethnicity. I'm not going to dig into this now, but know that it's available for analysis and comparison to the New York City public population. And this does not mean you throw Acadience out for any reason. And actually, Acadience is very likely the closest we're going to get to a sample that is going to work well or reflect our students, but it's not a parallel, okay? What we need to do as researchers, we need to ask for more validation and subgroup analyses. Furthermore, screeners in all assessments to identify and diagnose students with dyslexia and reading disabilities need to balance sensitivity with specificity, meaning that the assessment accurately detects, let's say dyslexia, without too many false positives or false negatives, okay? And this is, there's testing error in any assessment you use. The Institute of Educational Science states that screeners need to have a reliability, that's test, retest, internal, and iterator for any researchers out there, of 0.7 or higher, and a predictive validity of 0.6 or higher. We need to use those as our guideposts as we gather more Acadience data from the New York City population. These technical issues matter very much as they increase rates of discrimination when it comes to identifying which students receive services. Tim Odegaard has asked the critical question, Dr. Tim Odegaard, what is the relationship between school context and the identification rate of dyslexia in public schools? Now, Tim is in Tennessee. Tim gave me the permission to use his slide. I'm going to spend the most time on this slide, and I want you to just be here with me for a second, okay? And you're going to have to acclimate yourselves. He investigated the percent of first grade reading risk profiles on the ISIP assessment across schools with varying grades. Okay, you know you grade schools? A being top performing schools all the way over to DF being the worst performing schools. As you will see, 6.5% of students in grade A, so find that, had a profile of dyslexia. But go all the way across, 11.4% of students in DF schools presented with this profile. As you look across each row of reading risk profiles, you will see that the percent of students with reading risk profiles and in need of Tier 3 support in grade A schools is about half that of grade DF schools, and yet the grade A, so go back to grade A, school-assigned dyslexia category, meaning that the students were labeled with dyslexia under state law and were receiving dyslexia-specific intervention, is much larger than the DF schools. And that should cause everyone to pause. If you're interested, the red numbers are a combination of students with the dyslexia and mixed type profiles. In other words, as Tim explains, as the prevalence of struggling readers and spellers in a school increases, so the more struggling readers and spellers you have, the identification of dyslexia at the school decreases. In his analyses, the identification of dyslexia is the lowest in academically underperforming and economically under-resourced schools. And we have to figure this out. As I said at the beginning of the talk, it is likely going to be local efforts that make the most difference and have some staying power. Therefore, I want to spotlight a New York City program called Promise Project. And one of my colleagues from Promise Project is here, so now I'm so happy you're here, which partners with Columbia Medical Center to serve families from low-income communities to receive the evaluations they deserve in an effort to combat exactly what Tim found in his research. Their early Promise Project program, oh my gosh, that's my alarm to put my kids to bed. I know this is when we start the bedtime process. If you just turn it off. Kiddos, if you're watching, yeah, it's time. You know, the bedtime, you shower, the whole thing, right? It goes on and on until 8:30. Okay, and back to this very important point about Promise Project. Their early Promise Project, this is what one of the things I'm most excited about, is a groundbreaking program to identify students starting in kindergarten. We need more of this. Okay, so let's imagine that you do transform identification in your school system, but you don't deal with intervention or teacher prep. You still wouldn't be the vehicle version that we are striving for to make real progress. So let's talk about intervention. It simply means what you see up on this screen, and let me just say the opposite. Intervention is not pulling together a small group of kiddos and putting them in a small group and doing some activities with them. Okay, that is not intervention. Thank you. I can't believe that gets an applause, right? It's like, is the bar that low? Oh my gosh. This is a diagram that so many of you in the audience know very well, so I won't walk you through it. But this is showing the components of structured literacy, which is the most effective approach to supporting all striving readers. And let's be clear, all emergent readers need this, okay? My own children, they needed exactly this, and I gave it to them at home. Particularly students with dyslexia and language-based reading disabilities must receive this type of instruction. As you see, to bring us back to a map, New York also doesn't have intervention policies in place, which I found so surprising. And there is no New York State requirement for schools to have a reading specialist. Astounding. But this creates a glaring contradiction because obviously students with IEPs are legally required from federal mandate to receive special ed services and interventions. The complexities of intervention implementation cannot be overstated. I have spent the overwhelming majority of my career in the intervention space as a reading specialist, as a researcher, and an implementer of interventions. These are 6 things that as I was typing out this slide, they just came right off my fingertips. Grouping. How many students are going to be in each intervention group? Is it 1-to-1, 1-to-3, 1-to-5? I recently saw a group that was 1-to-8, and I was like, is that intervention? I don't know. Dosage. How many times a week? Okay. Once a week is not going to get the job done. Okay, I'll talk a little more about high dosage later. Duration based on progress monitoring. How many sessions should each student receive over an extended period of time? Opportunity cost, what are students missing during intervention time? Hopefully nothing, right? But okay, we know the realities of school. The program used, is it a structured literacy format that meets those students' needs? And most importantly, honestly, are the interventionists available? You could come up with a great plan, but if there aren't interventionists to actually execute it, what good is that plan? And furthermore, even if policy is in place and the playbook to address those 6 variables are in place, my colleague Devin Kearns and colleagues have demonstrated that intervention is most effective when it exists within a database decision-making model, which adds another complexity here. That model is exactly as it sounds. It's a collaborative environment focused on assessment, monitoring, and adjusting intervention based on data to ensure student progress. The model is in the center. That interacts with numerous additional variables that impact implementation. And this is if you work in the DOE, you're like, yeah, it's super complicated. Just look at the top bar of macro and mesosystematic factors. Just there, it's talking about leadership knowledge. Do your leaders have the knowledge? Is there a culture of data use? I talked a little bit about that before. Is there a professional climate? Okay, and I could go on and on. So it's not just those 6 variables. It's not just having the right program. It's all of this, and I'm going to go a step further. In addition, with database decision-making comes a database individualization progression, which needs to occur where each student in the group is provided the intervention, is assessed, and decisions are made as to whether the intervention should continue or if it needs to be adapted based on the child's diagnostic data. Okay? Think about whatever school you're in. How close are you to solving those 6 variables, putting a DBDM model with a DBI model inside of it? In support of those 2 database models, I'm a researcher, so I can't help but back this up, so just hang with me. Filderman and Tosti showed that when 4th and 5th grade students were randomly assigned to 3 conditions, BAU is business as usual, initial customization of a multisyllabic word reading intervention, and initial customization of a multisyllabic word reading intervention, this is a mouthful, with database decision making, okay? Both intervention groups outperformed the business as usual group on multisyllabic word reading. But the intervention group that did intensive database decision making along with this wonderful multisyllabic word reading intervention, the students who got the database decision making outperformed the other group on a transfer task of decoding. Okay, so how do we do more of this intervention with data being the focus? Well, another local example is taking the phenomenal school-wide intervention and data-driven model of Windward Institute, where I spent the day, and use it to support the work of the Literacy Academy Collective, which opened the first public school in the nation located right here in the South Bronx for students with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities, and they're opening their 2nd school in Central Brooklyn next year. During Literacy Academy, yes. During Literacy Academy's summer training program, Windward teachers, during LAC's summer training practicum, Windward teachers teach alongside public school teachers who are newly trained in Windward's methods. This model is effective. It uses real-time data to inform instruction, and this is what I would call transformative, this type of partnership. So again, we need more of this. Okay. So your school system may have transformed intervention and identification, but your community has not yet dealt with teacher preparation. We still wouldn't be ready to make substantial progress because without it, we're gonna constantly have to deal with teachers who come into the system where you either need to train them or you have to break bad habits. With regards to teacher preparation, there are over 600,000 teacher candidates each year in the US. And as a professor of education, I have a responsibility to ensure that my candidates have the skills and knowledge to support literacy outcomes from the day they step into their first classroom. What we have seen is a groundswell of efforts to overhaul or highlight the issues of teacher prep courses not teaching effective literacy instruction. Call it science of reading, call it effective literacy, call it structured literacy. Whatever makes you comfortable, call it what works, okay? Mississippi went from the 49th to the 21st rank in their NAEP scores by making several changes, one of which was retraining professors. It was radical. These professors were retrained and then taught their literacy courses using their new knowledge. Sold a Story is a podcast that captivated the country and shed a harsh light on teacher prep. This Facebook page, it's called What I Wish I Learned in College, has almost 250,000 followers who discuss their woes about teacher prep training daily. And the Path Forward from Hunt Institute brings together state-level cohorts of leaders to make major changes to higher ed teacher prep to align it to the science of reading. As a part of Path Forward, there are important conversations about a lack of impactful fieldwork prior to becoming a certified teacher. Classwork will not translate into the real-world experience of teaching a child to read. Those of us who do it, they are two different things. We should look at exemplars from other industries to impact fieldwork. For example, nurses, they must do a minimum of 30 blood draws before they can sit for their certification exam. While currently not a requirement, I am working doggedly to advocate that all teacher candidates complete just a minimum of 20 sessions teaching a child to read for their certification. This picture shows a CUNY Reading Corps pre-service teacher doing just that. This is what led me to co-found CUNY Reading Corps with Andrew Fletcher, who's in the audience. Which started in the midst of the pandemic in the fall of 2020, and now is run by an incredible team of people who work full-time on the initiative. So I wanna give a shout out to the CUNY Reading Corps team. Yes, they deserve it. This initiative came out of my research on tutoring and my work with pre-service teachers. Research shows that high dosage, meaning 3 to 5 days a week, okay, that's how much the students need to receive. It's effective and can have considerable impacts on literacy outcomes. And in fact, it was one of the only effective strategies that combated COVID learning loss. Also, when pre-service teachers serve as tutors, they reap personal and professional benefits. Again, this is one of my grad students, Ria, running a small group of intervention using one of our programs. So in the fall of 2020, I had 30 hours of field work in my undergrad and graduate courses, and I knew that watching videos was not sufficient for training teachers on how to teach a child how to read, and my students get one literacy course in their master's degree before they go off to get certified, or one in their undergraduate coursework before they get certified. There's a lot of responsibility on that course. So I set out to improve teacher training and improve outcomes for striving kindergarten to second grade students whose families couldn't afford tutoring, right? We also know the great divide of tutoring, right? Families of privilege, of course, and I don't disparage it one bit. We have to fill this equity gap, though. It's obvious and can be filled. The result has been something that addresses all three of the variables that we discussed tonight. We work with schools to look at their Acadience data and roster those students in red and yellow to receive intervention. So this becomes a data conversation with the schools. We force them to pull out that data set and let's talk about it and who needs help. From there, we deliver a minimum of 20 tutoring sessions. Many students receive upwards of 40 or even 60 sessions using 2 structured literacy programs, Reading Ready and Reading Go. And many students receive, I think I mentioned this, as many sessions as they need. So even if our university student semester is over, but the child still needs support, we repair them with another tutor for the next semester. The pre-service teachers receive, and obviously they're improving their training because they receive free training, a bag of materials, coaching, and observations from the CUNY Reading Corps team. And what you see here, the school leadership also supports them. This is an incredible principal in the Bronx who cherished her CUNY Reading Corps tutors who came every day to help out. Since 2020, the program has grown dramatically, as Jamie mentioned, to the extent that last year we trained 880 pre-service teachers in the largest urban university system in the country, who then tutored over 2,300 students from economically disadvantaged New York City public schools. We do this through the generous support of local funders. This gives you just a bit more detail. We do this both in person and remotely. We hire the tutors with grant funds, or this is a requirement for their course. You heard the numbers about the number of tutor placements and students. This resulted in us providing 52,000 free tutoring sessions to children in need in 1 year. This was just last year. Thank you. And we have 77 incredible New York City partnerships. Over an average, this is just based on an average of 23 tutoring sessions. We consistently see that students who receive one of our programs, Reading Ready, make significant gains on criterion reference measures of foundational skills. We always want to be anchored in the data, and on standardized measures of early literacy. So this is the STAR Early Literacy Assessment. We don't want it based on what our tutors are administering. That would be criterion reference. On a standardized assessment, the tutors step away and the students take this, and we're seeing this incredible growth. The same is true for students who receive the Read and Go program. And most notably, 47% of our first graders who received Read and Go were no longer at risk for reading failure at the end of their tutoring sessions. So many of those students just needed targeted one-on-one support, which is what families of means would buy through private tutoring, right? So imagine you're a school on the right, and again, 98% of your students need interventions. This would require a fleet of trained individuals. Well, this is what CUNY Reading Corps does. I had the pleasure of visiting a school this summer. My favorite work is going out to the CUNY Reading Corps schools. These tutors, this school had 12 CUNY Reading Corps tutors who tutored 5 students each 4 times a week. This transformed the outcomes for that school just over the short summarizing session. I recently founded a nonprofit, my colleagues are here tonight, called the Reading Institute, to share the training, programs, and implementation model widely for free with other universities looking to improve their pre-service teacher training. At the nonprofit, we developed and now maintain the asynchronous trainings for both programs, Reading Ready and Reading Go. We mail out kits. We love doing this. We help with data tracking and implementation support. And the nonprofit has shared the implementation model and programs with over 20 universities in the US and Australia. And there are 5 upcoming universities who are running replication of this tutoring model. We have coined this special group of partners the University Tutoring Collaborative. The most stark contrast to the CUNY Reading Corps model is our partnership with Eastern Oregon University. And even though their program is much smaller than CUNY's, it is impactful for the size of their remote community out in the eastern part of their state. So it doesn't matter how big, or as an economist would say, like the size of your tent, it just matters that you make a difference for the kids who are in front of you and for those that you can reach. So, in order to transform a school system and finally make it to the vehicle mode, I have kids, right? That became very clear, okay? We need accurate identification, extensive interventions, and rigorous fieldwork for teacher prep, just as I highlighted is being done by organizations at the local level in New York City. But we need these components to scale because there is so much need. I have recently been captivated by the work of Dr. John List, an economist at the University of Chicago and the author of The Voltage Effect. John explains that if your product or approach is reliant on a person or a group of people, it won't scale. It needs to be about the ingredients. In addition to being able to share the ingredients, John and his colleagues emphasize that you need to test for false positives and take it seriously. It may work locally, our local is New York City, but not elsewhere, so there's Eastern Oregon. And this is why we at the nonprofit analyze data from all of our university models. In fact, we have doctoral students, and now I'm saying CUNY Reading Corps and the nonprofit, there have been doctoral students and professors from around the country interested in investigating the impact of CUNY Reading Corps and the larger university tutoring model. And I'm very proud, at some other time I can tell you about an incredible dissertation that was conducted by an education student at Harvard last year. Other fabulous research is coming out of Eastern Oregon, out of doctoral students at CUNY. Stanford has recently reached out to research the program. Australia's running some research, and now the University of Chicago is interested in researching the entire model. It would be very easy for me to shy away from this, right? Because it would make me, as one of the authors of the program and of the model, I'm vulnerable, right? Like, what if? But I know that if you really want to make a difference, you have to open it up for research. You have to have that proof that it goes beyond you. If you can, if you can share the ingredients with the same efficacy, and if other factors are in place that I don't have the time to go over but are in John's book, you have the potential to scale vertically and horizontally. John somehow left, I don't know how he does what he does, but he left his academic post and at one point was the chief economist at Uber. Uber, despite its moral misbehaviors, scaled. It scaled because of the fundamental building blocks were there. It had a meteoric rise. It took over San Francisco starting in 2011, so that was its vertical scale. It took it over, and then now, in 2024, it's in 10,000 cities across the world. I don't know that much about Uber, except that I am a customer, but I thought about their ingredients. Their ingredients are, they have a local community that is replenishable. You get your driver's license and we're right, or you turn a certain age and you can be an Uber driver. There's autonomy. You set your own schedule. They have a great app, right? Their technology and a vehicle, and you can be a part of this. Their training and verification is universal, and they have a great incentive, right? You can make money. Now the university tutoring model has gone through, granted a much smaller, but similar initial scaling phenomenon. This started, the CUNY Reading Corps started at Brooklyn College, and I handed it to CUNY Central because they could recruit many more pre-service teachers from all 25 CUNY campuses. And they could manage grants and do all of these other things that I was drowning in. At almost the same time that I handed it up to CUNY Central, I wrote a grant with colleagues at American University, and I handed them the implementation baton and the free intervention programs. They ran their own program, and that started the horizontal scale momentum. So I also tried to pinpoint the university tutoring model ingredients that make it amenable to scaling. Well, it also has a local replenishable workforce, right? You're always going to have university students. They have autonomy over their schedule. They pick when they're going to tutor. We give out the technology being the intervention programs and materials. We have universal training and verification. And there are incentives, right? The impact on your own teaching skills and the impact on striving readers. And in many cases, the tutors will get paid or are paid because they're hired if it's not part of their coursework. So, in closing, I'm just going to say it. So there are a lot of similarities between these. Now, I will say Uber could buy, I was going to say a small country, but I was like, maybe it's just like a country. And we do all of our work with grants. But there is something to any of you out there that has a program at the local level that's effective. Think about your ingredients. And can you hand them off? Can you hand off the baton? Okay, in closing, we need multiple equity-based, scalable efforts focused on the three things that I talked about tonight: identification, intervention, and teacher prep, okay? These efforts must scale. We have an opportunity to get this right in New York because the ground is fertile. I want to encourage us, though, to research what is most effective and scalable before we make decisions, all right? Only then will we have a fleet of transformed school systems across our city, state, and country that can actually address the 33 million students in need of support. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
This is my sixth year. We've done about 2 lectures a year, so this is probably my 11th lecture I've done since I've been here. I don't know that I've ever seen a lecture where people are applauding mid-lecture. I mean, for real, like that's just really incredible. When I do our commencement speech for our 8th graders every year, I talk about this idea of passion. And I talk about the idea, a lot of people think about passion as like this thing that comes from inside you, like you feel this amazing thing that you want to give to the world. And I'm like, that's actually not how passion works in my opinion. In my opinion, and maybe this is, I don't want to like challenge anybody's expectations around passion, but I do think the idea of seeing a need in the world and then being compelled to fill that need, for me, that's where passion comes from. And when I see your work, Katie, that's all I can think about is you're living and walking in that passion. And I think New York City and the kids that you serve are greater for that. So thank you for everything. I also appreciate all the call-outs, all the great friends we have here from the LAC to Promise Project. But I am going to give a few big shouts to our internal team here, the Windward Institute team. Alexis Pokna, who's our director of the Windward Institute, and her incredible team, Sonia, Harry, Allison, Danielle, such a great group of folks. Thank you all for all the great work to make this lecture come alive. We also have on the back side of this, and Harry, thank you so much, we have a tech team. Harry kind of spans both here, working in tech and in the Windward Institute work. So tech team, thank you all for everything you've done. We really appreciate you all being here tonight. And for our virtual folks, we're going to say goodnight and thank you for tuning in. And we hope you'll join us in the future for our spring lecture, the Schwartz lecture. So thank you all. And then we'll conclude and close out our virtual session here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for joining the 2024 Fall Community Lecture, Transforming Literacy Education, Early Identification, Intervention, and Teacher Training with Dr. Katie Pace Miles. For more information on courses and workshops offered by the Windward Institute, please scan the QR code. Be sure to subscribe to a variety of information on thought leadership included in our newsletter, The Beacon, Read Podcast, and more. Save the date. The 2025 Robert J. Schwartz Memorial Lecture will be held on Wednesday, April 9th at our Westchester Middle School campus. Like, share, and follow us on social media. The Windward Institute is made possible by the Windward School and the generous philanthropic support from individual, corporate, and foundation funders. Please consider donating to the WI today by scanning the QR code. For more information on Dr. Katie Pace Miles and her work, check out the websites on your screen.